My name is Ram Messheimer, and I am 17 years old. I grew up in a home where the name of Jesus was not just ignored, but seen as a warning. To my family and to everything I was taught in my community in suburban Chicago, he was a false prophet, a man who had led our people into a 2,000-year exile of confusion. I saw Christianity as a story for others, a path that had nothing to do with the truth of my ancestors. I was young, arrogant, and certain that I knew exactly who the Messiah was not. To me, the cross was a symbol of history's greatest deception, and those who followed it were merely chasing a ghost. I spent my Friday nights at the synagogue and my days studying the history of my people, convinced that our strength lay in our tradition and our rejection of outside myths. I looked at the world through a lens of intellectual pride, thinking that faith was something for the weak or the uneducated. My life was planned out: university, a career in law, and a future rooted in the same skepticism my father and grandfather had carried. I didn't need a savior because I didn't believe I was lost. I thought I was standing on solid ground, never realizing that the ground was waiting to open up beneath me. Everything changed on the night of January 21st, 2026. A massive winter storm had turned the I-94 into a sheet of black ice. I was driving home late, the music loud, feeling invincible the way only a teenager can. The heater was blasting, fighting against the sub-zero temperatures outside, and I was focused on getting back to my warm bed. I remember the headlights of a semi-truck suddenly swerving into my lane. The driver had lost control on the slick pavement, and the massive trailer began to jackknife across the highway. I remember the scream of tires and the sickening crunch of metal folding around me like paper. The world spun into a blur of shattering glass and twisting steel. I felt a momentary, white-hot flash of pain, and then there was only the cold, white silence of the snow. My car was a heap of scrap metal in a ditch, and for a few seconds, I could hear the wind whistling through the gaps in the frame. Then the sound faded, and the darkness took over. I died in that wreckage. My heart stopped beating as the emergency crews struggled to reach my mangled car. But while my body was trapped in the steel, I was somewhere else. I didn't find myself in a dark tunnel or a void of nothingness. Instead, I found myself standing in a realm of light that made the Chicago sun look like a flickering candle. The brightness didn't hurt my eyes. It felt like it was pouring into me, filling up parts of my soul that I never even knew were empty. I looked down at my hands and they were whole. There was no blood, no glass, no cold. But the peace I felt was quickly interrupted by a deep, ancient defensive wall rising up inside me. Before me stood a man. I knew who he was instantly, and my first instinct was to turn away because I had been taught he was a deceiver. Even in this place of impossible beauty, my pride was like a shield. I looked at him and said, "You are the one they used to pull us away from the Torah. Wede, you are the false one. You are the reason my people have suffered." I expected him to be angry. I expected him to defend himself or to show me the wounds in his hands as a way to guilt me. But he didn't strike me down. He didn't look at me with anger or judgment. Instead, he looked at me with a love so heavy, it felt like it could hold up the entire world. His eyes saw through every wall I had built. They saw every doubt, every hidden fear, and every moment I had lied to myself about being satisfied. The weight of his gaze was more powerful than the impact of the truck. I felt a deep, burning shame for my arrogance, and then a peace that washed it all away. I realized that everything I thought was a lie was actually the foundation of the world. He wasn't a myth or a historical mistake. He was the center of everything. I fell to my knees, not because I was forced, but because his presence was the most real thing I had ever experienced. My knees hit the surface of what felt like warm light, and I wept. I cried for the years I had spent mocking him, for the blindness of my heart, and for the realization that I was standing before the very person I had spent my life rejecting. "Ram," he said, and his voice sounded like the hum of 1,000 hives of bees, sweet and powerful. It resonated in my bones. "You have judged what you did not know, but I have a task for you. I am the great builder, and the house of this nation is about to be shaken to its core. I will show you where the foundations will hold. You have seen the walls of brick and stone in your city, but I will show you walls built by faith and the sweat of honest labor." He reached out his hand, and as I took it, the light around us shifted. It was still January, and the land below us was covered in a spiritual gray mist, a thick layer of darkness that seemed to choke the life out of the cities. But scattered across the map of America, I saw 7 spots that burned with a fierce golden light. They looked like stars fallen to earth, glowing with an intensity that the darkness could not touch. He began to speak, moving me through the air, showing me the visions of the sanctuaries he is preparing for the days ahead. He didn't speak of abstract things. He spoke of the work of the hands, of hammers and nails, of seeds and soil. He spoke of a physical refuge for a physical storm. We moved through the air, and the first place he took me was far to the north, where the world was a vast sheet of white and blue. I could feel the biting cold of the Arctic air, but it didn't pierce me the way the Chicago wind had on the highway. Instead, it felt clean, like a cold glass of water after a long fever. Below us, the land was rugged and untamed, a wilderness of towering mountains and endless forests of dark green trees. But over this land, there was a dome of gold that shimmered like a silken veil. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It was a physical barrier that seemed to hum with the same power I felt coming from the man standing beside me. "Look closely, Ram," he said, his hand resting on my shoulder. "This is a land I have prepared for those who are willing to work with what the earth provides. Many have called this place a wasteland, a frozen graveyard, but in the days of the shaking, it will be a storehouse of life." As we descended toward the ground, I saw people. They were not the kind of people I knew back home. There were no suits, no expensive cars, no one staring at a screen. I saw men with thick, graying beards and hands that were stained with the oil of engines and the sap of trees. I saw women who moved with a grace born of strength, their faces weathered by the sun and the wind, but their eyes bright with a peace I couldn't explain. They were building. I watched as a group of men hauled massive logs from the forest, using thick ropes and their own physical power to move the timber. There was no sound of heavy machinery, only the rhythmic thud of axes and the steady pull of human muscle. He led me into a small settlement tucked between a frozen bay and a wall of jagged peaks. The houses were simple, made of wood and stone, built to withstand the heaviest snows. Inside one of the cabins, I saw a family gathered around a stone fireplace. A father was showing his young son how to sharpen a knife, his movements slow and deliberate. The mother was salting large slabs of orange fish, laying them carefully into wooden crates. There was an atmosphere of intense focus. It wasn't the frantic energy of the city where everyone is rushing toward a goal they can't define. This was the focus of survival, of honoring the physical world by mastering it. "I am the great builder," he whispered, and I felt his words vibrate in the air. "I laid the foundations of the mountains, and I measured the depths of the seas. When the systems of man crumble, those who have forgotten how to use their hands will find themselves lost. But here, I am teaching my people to return to the labor of the earth. They are building a sanctuary not just for their bodies, but for their spirits. Every nail they drive into a board is an act of trust. Every fish they pull from the ice is a gift from my hand." I watched as a group of young men worked on a pier, their boots splashing in the freezing slush of the shoreline. They were laughing despite the work, their breath forming white clouds in the air. One of them slipped on the ice, and the others didn't mock him. They reached out and pulled him up with a grip that was as steady as iron. I realized then that the protection I saw from above, that golden dome, wasn't just something he had placed there. It was being reinforced by the unity and the hard work of the people below. "They are not afraid of the cold," he continued, "because the fire in their hearts is hotter than any winter. In the days ahead, when the heat of the world's greed burns itself out, this frozen land will be a refuge. The pride of the cities will be their downfall, but the humility of the wilderness will be a shield. They are preparing the way, Ram. They are salting the meat and stacking the wood for those who will flee the falling towers of the south." He showed me the storehouses, deep rooms dug into the side of the hills where thousands of pounds of dried fish, grain, and salted meat were kept. It was enough to feed an army, yet it had all been gathered by hand, bit by bit through months of relentless labor. I saw the tools they used: handsaws, chisels, hammers that had been passed down through generations. There was a dignity in these objects that I had never noticed in the plastic world I came from. We rose higher, and I saw the boundary of this sanctuary. On one side of the golden line, the gray mist of the world was thick and suffocating, filled with the shadows of confusion and fear. But on the side of the sanctuary, the air was as clear as diamond. I saw a group of men standing at the edge of the gold, looking out into the mist. They weren't holding weapons of war. They were holding their tools, standing ready to welcome the weary and to defend the peace they had built with their own sweat. The physical labor is the prayer of the body, he told me. In your world, people think that work is a curse to be avoided. They seek ease and comfort, thinking it will bring them peace. But I tell you, true peace is found in the struggle of creation, in the honest work of the hands that mirrors my own work in the heavens. This land is the first of many, a place where the strength of the arm and the devotion of the heart are one and the same. As we began to pull away, the golden glow of the northern wilderness stayed with me. I felt a strange longing to be down there with them, to feel the weight of a log on my shoulder and the sting of the cold on my cheeks. I, who had never worked a day of hard labor in my life, suddenly understood that my soft hands were a sign of how far I had been from the truth. The light shifted again, and we were no longer over the jagged ice of the north. The air became heavier, smelling of damp earth and the sweet, dry scent of hay. We were moving over the vast, flat center of the country, the heartland where the horizon seems to stretch on forever. In the world below, the gray mist was particularly thick over the abandoned industrial centers and the sprawling suburbs, but right in the middle of the plains, spanning across Kansas and Nebraska, a second golden sanctuary pulsed like a beating heart. "This is the storehouse of the sun," he said, his voice echoing over the rustling of the winter wheat. In the cities, people have forgotten where their life comes from. They think it comes from a store, from a truck, from a plastic container. They have severed their connection to the ground I gave them. But here, I am restoring the covenant between the man and the soil. We descended until we were hovering just above a field that should have been dormant and brown in the late January cold. But within the boundary of the light, the earth was dark and rich, turning over easily under the blades of hand-drawn plows. I saw men and women walking the rows, their backs bent as they worked the soil. There were no massive tractors or automated sprayers here. Everything was being done by the strength of the human frame. "I am the gardener of souls," he whispered, "but I am also the one who blesses the grain. Look at their hands, Ram." I looked. I saw a young man, maybe not much older than me, kneeling in the dirt. His hands were caked with mud, his fingernails black with the earth he was tending. He was carefully placing seeds into a furrow, his movements almost like a ritual. Beside him, an older man with a straw hat and skin like leather was using a hoe to break up the clods of dirt. They were sweating despite the winter air, their shirts clinging to their shoulders. "In the days of the shaking," the great builder said, "the ships will stop moving and the shelves will go bare. The systems of man are fragile because they are built on greed and speed, but the soil is patient. These people have chosen the slow path, the hard path. They are learning to talk to the earth again. They are planting the food that will sustain the millions who will have nothing when the money fails." I saw a group of women near a large wooden barn. They were tending to livestock, sturdy cattle with thick coats and goats that climbed over piles of stone. The women were carrying heavy buckets of water from a hand-pumped well, their muscles tensed under the weight. There was no whining, no complaining about the difficulty of the task. They moved with a rhythmic, steady pace, knowing that every drop of water was a lifeline for the animals that would provide milk and meat for the community. "Notice the lack of machines," he pointed out. "The machines made men lazy. They made them forget the value of a single grain of wheat. Here, every seed is precious. Every plant is a miracle. They are laboring with me, not against the earth. When the great drought comes to the lands outside the light, this ground will remain moist. When the pests devour the crops of the proud, these fields will be hidden." I watched as the sun began to set over the plains, casting long shadows across the golden dome. The workers didn't stop because they were tired. They stopped because the light of the day was done. They gathered at the edge of the field, shaking the dirt from their clothes and wiping the sweat from their brows. I saw them sharing a simple meal of bread and water, sitting on the tailgates of wooden wagons. Their laughter was deep and genuine. It was the laughter of people who knew the satisfaction of an honest day's work. "I have placed a blessing on the labor of the simple," he told me. "The world mocks the farmer. They call him backwards and unlearned. But I tell you, the farmer who works the land with his own 2 hands is closer to the secrets of heaven than the scholar who sits in a tower of books. This land is the breadbasket of the remnant. It will be a place where the hungry will find more than just food. They will find the dignity of the plow." We rose higher, and I saw the sheer scale of the operation. Thousands of acres were being tended this way, an army of workers moving across the landscape like a living wave. The golden light intensified as the night came, making the fields glow from within. It was as if the earth itself was radiating the glory of the one standing next to me. "They are preparing for the February shift," he said, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "They know that the time of ease is over. They are working now while it is still day, so that they can stand firm when the midnight of the world arrives. Every furrow they dig is a prayer for the lost. Every barn they raise is a shelter for the broken." I felt a surge of respect for these people. Back in Chicago, I would have looked down on them. I would have seen them as relics of a past that didn't matter. But here, in the presence of the truth, I saw that they were the most important people on the planet. They were the ones holding the line between life and starvation. They were the ones who had understood that the great shaking required a foundation made of more than just thoughts. It required a foundation made of sweat, soil, and stubborn faith. The great builder turned my gaze toward the east, and the flat horizon of the plains began to wrinkle and rise into ancient, rolling waves of green and gray. We were over the Appalachian Mountains, a place where the earth itself seemed to have been folded by giant hands. The air here was different. It was thick with the scent of pine needles, damp moss, and the faint, sharp smell of wood smoke. The gray mist of the world was clawing at the base of these hills, but as soon as the fog touched the rising slopes of Kentucky and West Virginia, it dissolved into nothing. A third golden sanctuary was settled here, cradled in the valleys like a child in its mother's arms. "Look at the stones, Ram," he said, his voice deep and resonant like the low notes of an organ. The world has looked at these mountains and seen only poverty and struggle. They have called the people here simple and forgotten. But I have always chosen the things the world rejects to be the cornerstones of my kingdom. Here, the labor is of a different kind. It is the labor of the wall. We descended into a narrow valley where a fast-moving creek cut through the center of a small village. I saw men and women working with heavy gray stones. They weren't using mortar or cement. They were fitting the stones together by hand, one by one, building walls that snaked along the ridges of the hills. It was grueling, back-breaking work. I watched a man lift a rock the size of a suitcase, his muscles trembling, his face flushed with the effort. He turned the stone over and over until he found the exact spot where it fit perfectly against the one below it. "This is the craftsmanship of the heart," the man beside me whispered. "Every stone they place is a vow. They are not just building a fence, they are building a fortress of peace. In the days of the shaking, when the great cities of the coast are swallowed by the waves and the wind, these mountains will stand firm. The earth will groan, but these stones, placed with the intent of love and the sweat of the faithful, will not move." I saw a group of women sitting on a porch nearby. Their hands were busy with wool and needles, but their lips were moving in a steady, rhythmic hum. It wasn't just talking. It was like they were weaving the very air around them. He showed me that their prayers were not just words. They were physical pillars of light that rose up from the valley and joined the golden dome above. "The world thinks that work is only what you can see with your eyes," he told me. "But I tell you, the labor of the Spirit is the hardest work of all. These women are the sentinels. They are the ones who hold the line when the night is darkest. Their tears water the ground, and their voices create a barrier that the enemy cannot cross. They are working the soil of the heavens while the men work the soil of the earth." We walked through the village, and I noticed that everyone was busy. There were no idle hands. Even the children were involved, carrying smaller stones or gathering firewood. I saw a group of young men clearing a trail through a dense thicket of briars. They were using scythes and machetes, their arms moving in a steady, tireless rhythm. They weren't clearing the path for themselves. They were clearing it for the refugees they knew were coming. "They are preparing for the February shift," the great builder said, his eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and hope. "They know that the roads will soon be filled with those who have lost everything. They are building the shelters now. They are stacking the hay and the wood. They are preparing the mountain paths so that the weak and the tired can find their way to the light. This is the labor of hospitality, which is the most sacred work of all." I watched an old man carving a piece of oak with a small knife. He was making a bowl. His hands were gnarled and scarred, but his movements were precise. He wasn't making a piece of art to be sold. He was making a vessel to hold food for a hungry stranger. I realized that in this place, the concept of mine and thine had disappeared. Everything was ours. The physical work they were doing was a manifestation of the love they had for one another. "In the cities," he continued, "men build towers to their own names. They use steel and glass to show their power. But those towers are brittle. They will shatter like ice under the heat of my judgment. But here, they build with the things of the earth, stone, wood, and wool. These things have a memory. They know the hand of the Creator. This sanctuary is the heart of the remnant, the place where the ancient ways are being restored." As we rose back into the sky, I saw the stone walls stretching for miles. They looked like a golden thread sewn into the fabric of the Green Mountains. The light was so bright here that it seemed to pulse with every beat of the people's hearts. I saw the gray mist outside the boundary swirling in frustration, unable to find a single crack in the defenses. "They are ready," he said, his voice echoing through the peaks. "The shaking will come, but the mountains will sing. The people here have understood that safety is not found in fleeing from work, but in embracing the labor I have given them. They are my masons, my weavers, and my watchmen." I looked back one last time at the valley. I saw the man who had been lifting the heavy stone finally set it in place. He wiped his brow with his sleeve, looked up at the golden dome, and smiled. In that smile, I saw a peace that I had never known in my 17 years of life. A peace that came from knowing that his work had a purpose, that his hands were being used by the great builder to save a world that had forgotten how to build anything that lasted. The light shifted again, and the damp, cool air of the mountains was replaced by a dry, searing heat that tasted like dust and ancient sun. We were standing over the red rock canyons of the southwest, over the vast stretches of Ramzona and New Mexico. The landscape looked like a different planet, a world of deep oranges, burnt reds, and long purple shadows cast by the setting sun. The gray mist of the world was thin here, but it still hovered over the sprawling desert cities like a toxic smog. Yet, tucked away in the rugged heights and the hidden plateaus, a fourth golden sanctuary glowed with a steady, unyielding light. "The world looks at this land and sees only death," the great builder said, his hand guiding my gaze toward a deep canyon. "They call it a wasteland. They think it is a place where nothing can survive without the help of the world's systems. But I have always found my greatest treasures in the desert. Here, the labor is the labor of the well." We descended toward a flat mesa where a group of men were working with heavy iron bars and hand-cranked drills. They were digging into the scorched earth, their faces covered in red dust, their shirts soaked with sweat that evaporated as soon as it hit the air. I watched a man gripping the handle of a manual pump, his arms corded with muscle, his teeth gritted as he fought the resistance of the dry ground. "They are looking for the hidden waters," he whispered. "In the days of the shaking, the pipes of the cities will run dry, the great dams will fail, and the lights will go out. But I have hidden rivers beneath the stone that no man-made map can find. These people are using the strength of their bodies to reach the life I have buried deep for them. Every inch they gain through the rock is a victory of faith over the parched spirit of the world." I saw women nearby mixing red clay and straw with their bare hands and feet, treading the mud into a thick, workable paste. They were building structures that looked like they belonged to the earth itself, adobe homes with thick walls that would stay cool in the day and warm in the night. They weren't using levels or complex instruments. They were using their eyes and their touch, feeling the balance of the mud and the strength of the straw. "Look at the orphans, Ram," he said, pointing to a group of children who were helping to carry small buckets of water. They were smiling, their skin bronzed by the sun. In the cities, these children were forgotten. They were numbers on a screen. But here they are being taught the value of the drop. They are learning that life is something you work for. That's something you protect with your own two hands. This desert is a fortress for the vulnerable. The high places will shelter them when the valleys below are flooded with the darkness of the February shift. I watched as the workers finally hit a vein of water. A small, clear stream began to bubble up from the red dust. The men didn't cheer with a loud noise. They stood in a circle, silent and reverent, as the water pooled in a stone basin they had carved out of the rock. One by one, they dipped their hands into the coolness and drank. It was a scene of such raw physical beauty that I felt a lump in my throat. I thought of the bottled water I used to waste in Chicago, and I felt a deep sense of loss for the connection I had never had with the things that kept me alive. "The labor of the desert is the labor of endurance," the man beside me continued. "It is the work of those who know that ease is a lie. These people have stripped away everything that was unnecessary. They have no toys, no distractions, no soft beds. They have the stone, the sun, and the water I give them. And because of that, they are stronger than any army. They are preparing the refuge for the thirsty. When the thirst for the world's lies finally breaks the spirit of the nation, they will come here, and my people will give them a cup of cold water in my name." I saw a group of men clearing a field of rocks, moving boulders that looked impossible for a human to lift. They used wooden levers and sheer willpower, working together to make a small patch of ground ready for planting. I realized that the golden dome over this desert wasn't just a roof. It was a shield that was being held up by the endurance of these people. Their physical struggle was creating a space where the spirit could finally breathe. "The shaking will come," he said, his voice like the wind blowing through a canyon. "The cities built on sand will fall, but the sanctuary built on the rock will remain. These people have made the desert blossom, not through the machines of man, but through the sweat of the brow and the obedience of the heart. They are my stones, my wells, and my hidden ones." We rose again, and the red canyons began to shrink below us. The golden light of the desert sanctuary stayed bright even as we moved away, a lonely beacon of hope in the vast, dry emptiness of the Southwest. I understood then that the great builder wasn't just building buildings. He was building a people who were as tough and as beautiful as the land they were taming. The scenery changed once more as we moved toward the south and the east. The dry red rock gave way to a vast expanse of rolling grasslands and rugged hills that seemed to pulse with a raw, muscular energy. We were over Texas, a land that felt as wide as the ocean and as solid as iron. Below us, the gray mist was heavy over the giant glass towers of the cities. But out in the wide open spaces, a fifth golden sanctuary blazed with a light so fierce it looked like the sun had come to rest on the earth. "This is the engine of the remnant," the great builder said, his voice ringing with a strength that matched the land below. "Many have relied on the hidden riches of this soil to fuel their greed and their wars. They took what I gave them and used it to build kingdoms of smoke. But here I am teaching my people to use the strength of the earth for the survival of the brothers." We descended toward a massive ranch where the horizon was dotted with thousands of cattle. But this wasn't a modern industrial operation. I saw men on horseback, their faces lined with the grit of the trail, moving the herds with a precision that came from years of being in the saddle. They weren't using electronic sensors or automated gates. They were using ropes, their own voices, and the strength of their arms. "The labor of the steward is a heavy one," he whispered as we hovered near a group of men fixing a fence. They were pounding heavy wooden posts into the ground with massive sledgehammers. I could hear the rhythmic thud of the wood striking the earth, a sound that felt like a heartbeat. One man swung the hammer with a grace that made the heavy tool look like an extension of his own body. Sweat poured down his face, mixing with the dust of the trail, but his grip never faltered. "In the days of the shaking," the man beside me continued, "the wires that carry the power of the world will go cold. The lights of the proud will flicker and die. but the energy of the heart and the heat of the forge will remain. Look there, Ram. He pointed toward a cluster of buildings made of heavy timber and stone. Inside, I saw the glow of a blacksmith's fire. A man was standing over an anvil, his arm rising and falling as he hammered a piece of glowing red iron. The sparks flew like tiny stars in the dim light of the shop. He wasn't making weapons, he was making tools. Plows for the heartland, drills for the desert, and axes for the north. This is the labor of the forge, the great builder said. He is hardening the metal so that it can serve the needs of the others. Texas is the provider. The strength found here will flow out to all the other sanctuaries. The meat from these herds will feed the hungry in the mountains. The tools from these fires will build the shelters in the frozen woods. They are the muscle of my body on this earth. I saw women in the long grass, gathering herbs and plants, their hands stained green and brown. They were drying the leaves and roots, preparing medicines that didn't come from a lab. They moved with a purpose, knowing that when the February shift arrived and the pharmacies were looted and empty, the healing would have to come from the things I had grown in the field. There was no data to follow here, only the wisdom passed from hand to hand. The world thinks that power comes from what you can control with a button, he said. They think they are strong because they have machines that do the work for them. But true power is found in the man who can hold a restless horse, the woman who can heal a wound with a leaf, and the community that stands together against the storm. The shaking will strip away the false power, leaving only the real strength of the faithful. I watched as a group of men worked together to pull a heavy wagon out of a muddy creek bed. They were waist deep in the water, their shoulders pressed against the wood, their boots slipping on the stones. They didn't yell at each other or look for someone to blame. They simply gritted their teeth and pushed as one. When the wagon finally moved, they shared a look of silent triumph that said more than any speech ever could. They are preparing for the weight that is coming, the man beside me said, his eyes reflecting the golden light of the sanctuary. They are building their bodies and their spirits to be the pillars that will hold up the weak. When the February shift breaks the back of the nation's pride, these men and women will be the ones who carry the burden. They are my oxen, my smiths, and my providers. We rose back into the sky, and I could see the golden light of Texas connecting with the lights of the other regions I had seen. It was like a web of gold was being woven across the continent, a network of survival built on the sweat of the brow. I looked at my own hands again, hands that had never held a hammer or a rein, and I felt a deep desire to learn. I wanted to be part of that strength. I wanted to know the weight of the iron and the heat of the fire. The time is short, Ram, he warned, and the air around us seemed to tremble with the truth of his words. The foundations are being tested even now. Those who think they can survive by their wits alone will find themselves empty-handed. But those who have embraced the labor of the kingdom will find that I have given them everything they need to stand. The scenery began to shift as we moved toward the humid, lush lowlands of the deep south. The dry wind of the plains died down, replaced by an air so thick and sweet it felt like breathing in a garden. We were hovering over the lands of Mississippi, Alabama, and the northern reaches of Florida. Below us, the gray mist of the world was heavy, clinging to the rotting skeletons of the old coastal cities and the shuttered factories. But in the fertile heart of the countryside, a sixth golden sanctuary pulsed with a soft, warm light that looked like the glow of a billion fireflies. "This is the nursery of the rebirth," the great builder said, his voice softening but losing none of its authority. In the world of the proud, the family was a thing to be broken. They turned the hearts of the children away from the parents and the hearts of the parents away from the home. They traded the slow, beautiful labor of the hearth for the cold speed of the machine. But here I am restoring the foundation of the human soul. We descended toward a large clearing surrounded by ancient oaks draped in silver moss. I saw a group of men and women working together to clear a field for planting. They were using hand tools to pull up the thick vines and weeds, their movements steady and patient. It was a place where the soil was so black and rich it looked like it could grow anything. "The labor of the South is the labor of the seed and the song," he whispered. Look at the schools, Ram. He pointed to a large building made of hand-cut cypress logs. It didn't look like the school I had attended in Chicago. There were no wires, no buzzing lights, and no screens. Through the open windows, I saw children sitting at wooden desks. They weren't staring at a wall. They were looking at books that were bound in leather and cloth. A woman stood at the front, her hands stained with the ink of a pen she was using to write on a slate board. They are not learning the lies of the world here, the man beside me said. They are learning how to read the heavens and the earth. They are learning the stories of the faithful and the laws of the soil. The children here are being taught to use their hands as well as their minds. Every afternoon, the lessons move from the desk to the field. A boy who can recite a psalm must also be able to plant a row of corn. A girl who can solve a problem of geometry must also know how to weave a blanket from the wool of the sheep. I watched as a group of young girls sat in the shade of a porch, their fingers flying as they worked with small wooden looms. They were laughing, their voices rising in a harmony that seemed to strengthen the golden dome above them. They were making clothes, sturdy, beautiful garments that would last for years, not the thin, disposable rags of the world I knew. There was a sense of peace in their work, a feeling that every thread they crossed was an act of building something that mattered. The labor of the mother and the teacher is the most vital work of the sanctuary, he continued. In the days of the shaking, when the systems of the world try to steal the souls of the young, this place will be a fortress of truth. They are raising a generation that knows how to survive because they know how to serve. When the February shift brings the darkness to the centers of learning in the North, these children will be the ones who carry the light of wisdom into the next age. I saw a man and his son walking through an orchard of fruit trees. The father was showing the boy how to prune a branch, his hands moving with a gentle firmness. The boy watched with wide, focused eyes, his own small hands trying to mimic the movement. It was a scene of such simple, profound connection that it made my heart ache. I thought of my own father, who was always busy, always looking at his phone, even when we were in the same room. I realized that the work of the sanctuary wasn't just about survival. It was about the restoration of love through shared labor. In the cities, the great builder said, men are lonely even in a crowd. They are surrounded by things but have no roots. But here, every person is a part of the vine. The father leads the son into the field, and the mother leads the daughter into the kitchen. They are building a world where the work is the glue that holds the family together. The sweat they shed together is more sacred than any treasure of the world. I watched as the sun began to dip below the horizon, and the golden light of the sanctuary seemed to soak into the very leaves of the trees. The people gathered for a meal, bringing the produce of their day's work to long wooden tables under the oaks. I saw bowls of rice, platters of fresh vegetables, and baskets of bread. Everything on the table had been made by the people sitting around it. They knew the history of every bite. They knew the effort it took to bring that life from the ground to the plate. The shaking will come, he warned, and the families built on the sand of convenience will be swept away. But the family built on the rock of shared labor and divine truth will stand. They are my gardens, my classrooms, and my nurseries. As we rose higher, the soft firefly glow of the southern sanctuary remained in my vision, a warm reminder that even in the face of judgment, there was a place being prepared for the heart to grow. I understood that the great builder was using the physical work of the hands to heal the broken spirit of the people, turning the curse of labor into a blessing of life. The air grew cold again, but it was a different kind of cold than the damp chill of the north or the biting wind of Chicago. This was a high, thin cold that tasted of ancient stone and endless sky. We were moving over the northern frontier, the vast, rugged stretches of Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas. Below us, the mountains didn't roll like the Appalachians. They jagged upward like the teeth of a giant, capped in ice that never truly melted. The gray mist of the world was thin here because the people were few, but it still pooled in the low valleys where the old highways used to run. However, on the highest ridges and across the most isolated plains, a seventh golden sanctuary stood like a crown of light. "This is the watchtower of the remnant," the great builder said, his voice carrying the sharpness of the mountain air. In the world of the distracted, no one was looking at the horizon. They were looking at their hands, at their screens, at their own reflection. They forgot that a house without a watchman is a house that is already lost. But here I'm training the eyes of my people to see the truth before it arrives. We descended toward a high, rocky plateau where a group of men were building a massive tower out of timber and fieldstone. It wasn't a decorative thing. It was a rugged, functional fortress built to overlook the passes below. I watched a man standing on a high scaffold, his hands wrapped in thick leather gloves as he guided a heavy beam into place. His face was etched with lines of deep concentration, his eyes constantly flicking toward the distance even as he worked. "The labor of the frontier is the labor of the sentinel," he whispered. "Look at the scouts, Ram." He pointed to a group of men on horseback moving through a narrow, snow-filled canyon far below the tower. They weren't riding for sport. They were tracking the movement of the mist, marking the places where the darkness was trying to seep into the high country. They moved with a silent, lethal efficiency, their bodies perfectly in tune with the animals they rode. One of the men stopped, dismounted, and knelt in the snow to examine a track. He wasn't using a device or a map. He was using the knowledge of the earth that had been carved into his mind through years of honest physical observation. "In the days of the shaking," the man beside me continued, "the sensors of the world will fail. The satellites will go dark, and the great ears of the cities will be deafened by the din of their own collapse. But the man who knows how to read the wind and the track will not be surprised. These people are the early warning system for all the other sanctuaries. When the February shift begins to tear at the fabric of the nation, the word will go out from these peaks first. They are the voice in the wilderness." I saw a group of women in a sheltered valley below the ridge. They were working in a long, low building made of stone, tending to large stores of grain and dried meat. But they were also working with metal, sharpening blades and repairing the stirrups and saddles of the scouts. I watched a woman holding a heavy whetstone, her arm moving in a steady circular motion against the edge of a scythe. The sound was a rhythmic, metallic scrape that echoed off the canyon walls. It was a sound of preparation, of a community that knew the peace they enjoyed was bought with constant vigilance. "They are not just watching for physical enemies," the great builder said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "They are watching for the rot of the spirit. They are the ones who guard the gates of the heart. The labor of the watchman is to stay awake when everyone else wants to sleep. It is the work of the lonely hour, the cold night, and the long silence. They are building their endurance so that they can hold the light when the rest of the world chooses the dark." I saw a father and his teenage daughter standing on a rocky outcrop. The father was holding a pair of heavy brass binoculars, but he wasn't using them. He was pointing toward a distant gap in the mountains, explaining something to the girl. She was listening with an intensity that reminded me of the children in the South, but there was a hardness in her gaze, a readiness that came from living on the edge of the world. She reached down and adjusted the pack on her shoulders, a simple act that showed she was ready to move at a moment's notice. "In the cities," he said, "people think that safety is a right. They think it is something the government or the police owe them. But here, they know that safety is a gift that must be defended with the sweat of the brow and the sharpness of the eye. They are the guardians of the remnant. They are the ones who will guide the refugees through the mountain passes when the February shift turns the lowlands into a maze of fear." I watched as the men at the tower finally set the top beam. They didn't celebrate with a party. They simply took their positions, looking out over the vast, empty beauty of the frontier. The golden light of the sanctuary seemed to pulse with a steady, rhythmic beat, like a lighthouse in a storm. I realized that this seventh light was the anchor for all the others. It was the shield that allowed the farmers to plant and the mothers to teach. "The shaking will come," he warned, his voice sounding like the rumble of distant thunder. "The towers of man's pride will fall because they were built to look inward. But this tower will stand because it was built to look toward me. They are my eyes, my scouts, and my wall." As we began to rise away from the high peaks, the golden light of the northern frontier stayed etched in my mind. It was a cold, hard light, but it was the most secure thing I had ever seen. I understood that the great builder was using the rugged labor of the frontier to forge a people who could not be shaken, a people who would stand as the final line of defense for the truth in a world that was about to be turned upside down. The 7 lights now burned as one across the map of the nation, a network of survival held together not by wires or signals, but by the sweat and the spirit of the people below. I stood beside the great builder, looking down at the continent one last time. From this height, the physical labor of the remnant looked like a beautiful golden tapestry being woven into the dark, gray fabric of the world. I saw the connection between the wood of the north and the stone of the mountains, between the grain of the plains and the cattle of the grasslands. It was a complete system, a new world being built in the shell of the old one, and it was being built by hand. "Do you see, Ram?" he asked, his voice filled with a profound and quiet joy. The world thought that by removing the burden of labor, they were setting men free. They replaced the hammer with a button and the plow with a machine. But in doing so, they lost the connection to the life I gave them. They became soft and their spirits became brittle. But these 7 lands are where the strength is being restored. The work of the hands is the medicine for the soul that has forgotten its creator. I looked at him, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid. I wasn't trying to argue or defend my old life. I felt a love for him that was so intense it was almost painful. He was the one I had been taught to hate, yet he was the only one who had ever truly seen me. He was the master who understood the weight of the stone and the heat of the forge because he had built the world itself. I reached out and touched his sleeve, and I felt a surge of energy that made me feel like I could lift a mountain. "I have shown you these things so that you can be my voice," he said, turning to face me. His eyes were like deep wells of light, containing all the history and all the future of the world. The time of preparation is almost over. The shift that begins on February 1st and culminates on February 5th will not just be a change in the weather or the economy. It will be the beginning of the great sorting. Those who have built their lives on the ease of the world will find themselves with nothing to hold on to. But those who have moved to the lands of the light, those who have taken up the tools of the laborer and the heart of the servant, will find that I am their shield. He placed his hand on my head, and I felt a warmth spread through my entire body, mending the broken pieces of my spirit. "Go back, Ram. Tell them that the great builder is calling his people home. Tell them that the safety is not in a bank or a tower, but in the soil, the wood, and the stone of the sanctuaries. Tell them to work while it is still day, for the night comes when no man can work. The labor is the path to the life." The brilliant realm around me started to dissolve, and I felt myself being drawn back toward the world of flesh and blood. The sensation of returning to my physical form was jarring beyond description. One moment I was floating in realms of divine light, and the next I was gasping for breath in a hospital bed, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the steady hum of monitors. The transition felt like being ripped from paradise and thrown back into a prison. Pain crashed over me in waves as my consciousness fully reconnected with my injured form. My skull throbbed where it had struck the window, and my chest ached with every shallow breath. But the fire in my spirit was stronger than the pain in my body. I remembered everything. The 7 sanctuaries burned bright in my memory like beacons of hope. The golden wilderness of the north, the fertile heartland, the mountain strongholds, the desert canyons, the rugged strength of the southwest, the nurseries of the south, and the watchtowers of the frontier. Today is January 29th, 2026. I am 17 years old, and I am no longer the boy who mocked the name of the Savior. I am a witness to the truth. I have seen the map of what is coming, and I have heard the voice of the one who holds the world in his hands. My friends, I share this testimony not because I am anyone special, but because time is running shorter than most people realize. The 7 sanctuaries I witnessed are not distant possibilities, but immediate realities for those who have eyes to see. They are places of hard work, of physical struggle, and of divine protection. Alaska, the Heartland Plains, the Appalachian Mountains, the southwestern deserts, Texas, the deep south, and the northern frontier stand as beacons of hope. But remember this above all else: you must move. You must take the step. The true sanctuary is found by those who are willing to leave the ease of the falling cities and embrace the labor of the kingdom. Build your walls through faith and the work of your hands. Prepare your families through the sweat of honest effort and obedience. Light the fire of genuine devotion in your homes while there is still time. If you are still listening right now, it means something inside you has been touched. Messages like this do not reach everyone, and they do not stay with everyone. You're here because part of you recognizes this moment. If you feel it, write in the comments where you are listening from, not as a habit, but as an act of presence. And if these words resonated, share this video with 3 people you care about, because light is meant to move, not to be kept. And if you sense that this path cannot be walked alone, that what you are carrying needs understanding and spiritual grounding, I want you to know that a private community already exists. Entering it means choosing growth, support, and direction, even in moments of weakness or silence. You don't need to have everything figured out. You only need to take the next step. This is where it starts. The February shift is at the door. Choose this day whom you will serve, for the wise will understand and prepare, while the foolish will trust in their own ease and be swept away forever.